So I think the only thing I want to say, I've had a chance to work with Ron for what, over a year now. It's really been a delight, and I've learned a lot from him. And in the course of the year, and this is not necessarily because of Ron, but the more I've learned about the role of economics and economists in climate, the more angry and depressed I've gotten. And it's almost like there's a completely different world that Ron inhabits than, if it's fair to say, than almost all of your colleagues. And if you've got a Herculean task to try to reorient the economics profession, but I know the papers you've written are an attempt to do that and to combine the world of economics and all that that entails and policy with a lot of the science that we're all involved in. So with that, welcome, Ron. We usually go officially till 45 after, but unofficially, we usually stay till the top of the hour of the next hour, if those of you who can remain. So I have nothing more to say. The floor is yours and the screen is yours, Ron.
Thank you, Herb, and thank you, everyone. I feel like I'm sort of, in a room with all my buddies here in HPAC, and I mean, there's some I think Stephen Penningroth may be the only person I don't know here, but and welcome. Thank you for coming. So I'm going to. And I'm always, I feel very honored to be working with you all. Let me, so I'm going to, here's my presentation. Some of you may have heard me, I gave a similar talk at the Healthy Climate Alliance, I think it was in February, or somewhere around there. And now, here we go. Okay, and don't get alarmed. That's there we go. Come on. Okay, and I will make this go so you can see it better, because some of that is pretty small type. Okay, so I am going to talk about one of our major focus in HPAC has been making this distinction clear, and particularly trying to work on the first part, the short-term emergency direct cooling, while recognizing that the bigger problem is the long-term greenhouse gas removal, that is, cuts and removal, and then ecological regeneration that is coupled with that, as Philip and Brew and Brian and others have been pointing out. So I really, and Herb is correct. I mean, I think the mainstream economics profession has not been helpful, at least in terms of pointing out the critical nature of what we're facing. In fact, some of the dominant models, by Nordhaus and other authors has been really kind of lowballing extreme. And I have a bit on that in the paper. Lowballing the estimates of damage, and I even got into some discussion with David Keith about that, because I think that has affected a lot of well-meaning folks who are quite aware of the seriousness of the situation, but are hesitant to kind of challenge what are people who are. I mean, he got the Nobel Prize for that work, and so they're kind of viewed as authorities on the economics of climate change, and I think very unfortunate, because it's not at all. Their work is awful, really. I mean, I have a friend who has Steve Keen, who's a very well-known heterodox economist who did a direct critique of Nordhaus's work, and he was just appalled. I mean, it was much worse than he thought. He said it wouldn't even pass undergraduate standards for methodology and just plain factual reasonableness. So it's really it's very unfortunate, and but to say the least. But what I'm going to talk about here, and I do have as I said, one slide on that, but I'm going to talk about these two climate I call it the two climate crises. So we have short run a warming emergency and a long-term emission greenhouse gas removal and ecological regeneration crisis. And I think most people here are quite aware of this. So I'm not, I have a lot of slides here, but one of the things I want to emphasize is that how this kind of relates to what the conventional wisdom is on this. And as I say here, conventional wisdom is grasping at straws. So there was a fairly recent event by Hertzgaard Walk, I don't know how to pronounce this, and Michael Mann, of course. And it got a lot of publicity, Washington Post editorial and so forth about this new research that said when we reach net zero, we'll only have 2 or 3 years of lag before we start, before we get a hiatus in increased worsening of impact instead of 34 years of temperature increases after net zero, and really grasping at this. He said, this is, the best climate science you've never heard of, and this is a breakthrough. And it turned out, I have a little vignette here about a colleague of ours who was at the press conference and asked Mann about, some of the things that we've raised, and many of us have talked about the Arctic sea ice, summer sea ice melting at an alarming rate, and just about to, we're all, very, as we'll say, very, very soon about to reach a point where we'll have zero, effectively zero summer sea ice for at least one day in September, and then of course increasingly for more days and more months. So this is coming. This is the beginning of crossing that tipping point. And Michael Mann and others are, and I don't mean to just target Michael Mann, because this is kind of the conventional wisdom that the IPCC and the conventional kind of climate policy experts have been promoting, is that we just need to double down and cut emissions. To get below 1.5, we need to cut by half by 2030, which most of us understand is just. I wish we could do it, but one of the things I'm going to point out here is that wishing and willing and having good science backing it up is not a political strategy. It does not move social systems. Social systems have enormous inertia that's tied to their economic infrastructure and their social relations and forces of production, if I may, draw from Marx. That make it very, very hard to change rapidly, especially. So anyway, I'll get to that. But I make the point here that even just to get below 2 degrees, not 1.5, you would need a 5% cut in emissions every year from now until 2030 and this is based on a national. I have it's the UN and United Nations Environmental Program's emissions gap report. Says we would need to get to 33 gigatons CO2 equivalent from about 50 right now. It's the estimate I'm using anyway. To have a 66% chance of staying below 2 degrees, well below 2 degrees, or 1.8 in 2100. So it's also, you look at the actual data. Well, I have it in the slide here, and I'm jumping around here. Whoops, where did my graph go? Well, you'll see it in the slide coming up that we've been going up every year until 2020, and then it just is not a realistic scenario in terms of how the global community has been performing, as we all well know. And here's some of the data on the Arctic sea ice melt, and some of the damage estimates. The point that might be interesting, because I don't want to just repeat things here. Here's the stuff that relates to what we were just talking about with Nordhaus and Herb and so forth. So if you look at the latest IPCC report, there is a they have it's box. It's in the working group 2. So I think it's the loss and damage. I had a referee on this paper who asked me to delve deeper into the AR6 report and find out what the IPCC says about the damages. And so it ended up being a footnote in this in the published version of this paper that I'm talking about. But it says that it's in figure cross working group box. Anyway, the references here. It shows that estimating a 2.6 degrees warming by 2100, it would show GDP loss of from 5 to 25%. The 5% is the Nordhaus dynamic integrated climate. It's the DICE model, economy model, that the one he got the Nobel Prize for. That has been criticized by Steve Keen, and the references are here, I believe, or you can find them in the paper. That is actually on the HPAC website, a preprint of this paper already. And you can see the gap between 25% and 5%, 5 to 25%. And the 25% estimates are based on just straight statistical kind of projection. They're not trying to be structural or anything. They're just looking at trends, and they, in addition to the Swiss Way report, this data as well. What happened here? Well, how did that happen? Oh, there we go. Okay. None of these estimates, neither the 5% or the 25% reduction in GDP by 2100 takes into account tipping points. So, in particularly, they do not discuss the loss of Arctic sea ice. As there's a section in that loss and damage report that talks about large-scale singular events. And they talk about the Amazon and Greenland and all these other things that, of course, are at risk, but they do not mention the first tipping point, that the Arctic sea ice, summer sea ice, that is widely regarded as the first tipping point that is actually happening, and so that's not taken into account in any of these estimates. So this is just I think it does back up what Herb was just saying, that the economic profession has been just sort of out to lunch on realistic modeling of what's actually going on in the economy. And unfortunately, I'm a heterodox economist, so I'm a very much a dissenting economist, and we in the heterodox community have known for years that the standard model, it's more of an ideology than a science, and that is why they for example completely missed the 2008 financial crash also, which Steve Keen, by the way, is one of the people who actually predicted. He actually had a model saying that this is what was going to happen before it happened. So, and that's one of the reasons why he's quite well known for that. I think there was 8 or 10, most of them heterodox economists, that had predicted that was. I mean, all of us were saying it was going to happen, but these people actually had models, and in some cases, were extremely prescient about exactly even timing. Okay, so let me move on. So that's this the other major point, and I'm trying to, it might be better if I was able to see where I am. So I'm going to just keep it like this for a second. Okay, so yeah, the general outline here is which I skipped over, is just sort of background framing our 2 climate crises. And then what I want to talk about is, and in my role as kind of one of the social scientists in the group here, I am often somewhat frustrated by, and it's not just us, it's generally a problem in this field, is that folks are really, just aghast is why politicians don't do something. Why is the world having such trouble addressing this crisis? This looks like it's certain for organized human existence. I just heard Chomsky the other day, and it could be an existential crisis. That is, we as human civilization could collapse if we don't turn this around. Or why is and so I wanted to address this in this paper. It was one of my because I did sort of feel pretty strongly about this, that the limits of moral suasion and breakdown strategies. So those are the two. The moral suasion is just how can you be so immoral? Don't you see that we have to do something? And the other one is the breakdown idea is, if we don't do cooling, for example, direct climate cooling, what we in HBAC are calling direct climate cooling. And by the way, we have, I think we're up to 17 different, methods, possible methods. Many of them have been, as Stephen Salter, who's here, for example, for MCB, and Brian, who's been working on the kelp restoration, and there are methods that are right now, being worked on extensively, and some of them implemented. And so there are numerous methods. It's not just solar radiation management or rather stratospheric aerosol injection, but many other ways to do this. The issue here is these folks say we can't touch that stuff because that will create a moral hazard and prevent reduce the urgency of emissions cuts and greenhouse gas drawdown. And of course that harkens back in my thinking to many people on the left used to feel that capitalism would collapse. We just kind of let it collapse, and when it collapses, the revolution will come, and we'll build a better society. That was called the breakdown strategy, and kind of scientific Marxism predicted that the laws of capital. And some of this, I have to admit, Marx has some language in some of his many writings, and some of them quite polemical, that did seem to suggest this, that for various reasons capitalism would collapse. But I don't think he meant it as a political strategy. He was kind of looking at the analysis side of it. Marx, I don't think, thought of it as something you can depend on, but we appear to have some folks anyway in the climate community who have this view that if we kind of lift the pressure for emissions reductions, then we will not be able to get the long run solution, achieve the long run solution. So we need to just let these kind of calamities and disaster continue until the damn politicians wake up, and the broader population gets the message that we have to be serious, and then something will happen. Of course, the problem with that is that the something that will happen may not be a good something. It may be the rise of authoritarian leaders and walls for climate migration, and just an increasingly brutal and slow collapse of what many of us consider some of the greatest achievements of human civilization are at risk here. So just like in you got fascism in Europe, you could get something like that because of when people are in distress, and they don't necessarily react in ways that are conducive to social progress. So I'm going on, I'm getting on my little lecture bandwagon here, but so this is some of the data in here that I've talked about, and many of the decline in sea ice in the Arctic, especially. The models have been, 2.1 times off. This is a little chart that was in Pistone's paper in 2019. So here's all a large array of models. Here's where they were in terms of sea ice sensitivity to how rapidly it was going to melt, and you can see that it's per change in global mean temperature, and you can see that way off. It's 2.1. It's happening 2.1s faster than the CMIP ensemble at the time, etc. Okay, so what's the alternative here? So the background, particularly the U.S., has been this kind of Manichean, good and evil, the battle between good and evil, and there's a lot of, there's reason for that. It's because it has become so polarized and so politicized, and we know that all these special interests, fossil fuel interests, right-wing billionaires, oligarch, have been sowing disinformation and preventing progress. So, of course, there's a reaction to that. Like, these people are just, we have to just, they're the embodiment of evil. The trouble is that, I think some of us, my daughter, for example, I have a daughter who just she can't talk about climate change because it's so depressing. She finds it so depressing that she doesn't want to think about it. I have another daughter who's in graduate school for climate science. So, but it is true that there's been talk of the generation dread and, this depression that the younger generation is experiencing because it just seems so helpless. We have this huge problem. We're not making progress, and the evil is winning out, and that this again is not conducive to mobilizing people, and you need to provide hope. And so this is a problem. We need to provide hope. And also we need to have a realistic strategy for transition. So you can't just frame it in purely moralistic or political terms, ignoring objective embedded physical and social institutional reality and the imperative of lifting up living standards, because most people in the world don't have time to think about climate change. I'm one of the fortunate people. I think most of us are, but in this listening to this right now, but for most people are still living in desperate poverty, and they don't have access to basic goods, basic dignified life, and that has to be acknowledged and dealt with. So that's the equity side that a lot of people are aware of. But and so we need, as we offer hope, not just for dealing with the climate crisis, but we need to, if it would be even better if we could say, we're going to have a better world, that if we can get through this and get to the other side, we will have a better world, a more equitable world. And so, this alternative frame that I'm talking about will frame this as an opportunity to move to this more, I call it the industrial cultivator society, from the industrial hunter-gatherer. Hunter-gatherer, where you're mining, you're looking for oil, you're looking for fossil fuel, and you're looking for all these minerals. And in the industrial cultivator society, you can get the energy, almost anywhere on the planet, from the sun or from the warming ocean, or from renewable methods that are widely available, wind. And you can also synthesize a lot of the material that right now we're mining, like graphite using carbon from the air to produce graphene and all kinds of synthetic materials, including fertilizer, fuel, et cetera, that we're now mining. So it really is a transition where hopefully we can take on the photosynthesis part that nature has mostly been doing. But we've overwhelmed the ability of nature to recycle our carbon, especially as we're talking now, and we need to help with that now. This is what we need to do. So fossil fuel should not be framed as some kind of original sin. It was the basis of modern industrial civilization, and in addressing the climate crisis, at least in the short term, is not fundamentally, I should say, a moral and political problem, but a practical and technological problem that must be addressed within existing social and economic systems. So in many ways, I'm sort of, this is kind of addressed to many of my I come from the left, obviously, and I'm sort of addressing my comrades and colleagues on the left that constantly tell me we need socialism. Without socialism, we're not going to get a solution. See, well, if we have to wait until we get democratic socialism, we're doomed, because the climate is working on a much faster clock than social evolution. And that is one of the arguments for a tourniquet, why we need direct climate cooling, to give us some time so that we can get our act together to deal with the more the fundamental problem and the longer term problem of GHG removal and ecological regeneration. So this sort of makes that point, and you can do it. We know we can do it with natural means or mechanical means, and many of you know a lot more about that than I do. I did do the 2021 paper on all this, and I mentioned some methods in that paper. Now, the other, let me see. Okay, the other. So getting to number 3, so just drilling down a little bit on those 2 points, disciplinary siloization and moral suasion and breakdown strategies, or variations of all those concepts, because they are all linked, of course. The disciplinary siloization is the sort of, we have politicians, social science entrepreneurs are trying to develop and implement solutions. They're focused on the politics, economics, and technological change aspects of GHG emissions. That's the marching orders that the social scientists, the politicians, entrepreneurs have taken from the natural scientists, that you've got to cut GHG emissions. So that's what people are focused on. Understandably, and it's true. I mean, it is true. The law, we have to do this. But on the other hand, you have the climate scientists have been documenting the damage that this is doing to natural systems and the potentially catastrophic impact that this might have. The tipping points of all these very alarming trends in nature. And the problem is that what we're trying to do, emergency direct cooling, kind of falls outside the traditional scopes of both. So we have, luckily we have many climate scientists in our group who recognize this and have been willing to step out of strictly kind of scientific sort of presentation of their or scientific activity into a more political realm of actually, signing some of our papers and directly promoting a political approach of which requires, essentially supporting direct climate cooling. But that's, most natural scientists say, look, we're the researchers, we provide the data, it's up to the politicians to act on it. And of course, so we get this disconnect. So the politicians are acting on it, but they're acting on something that is not actually going to have a beneficial effect for many, many years to come. So that's the problem. So that's the disciplinary silization problem. And I think, our group HPAC is actually one of the ways to get around that, to bring these, policy analysts, policy experts, and natural scientists, and social scientists, and engineers, and entrepreneurs, everybody together in one group, pushing for a real solution that will actually do something in the coming, decades, or not that won't. It's not something that will just sort of start improving things in after many decades, or possibly after a century or more. The other constraint is, of course, the economic and institutional constraint. And here, these examples, some of you have heard me talk about this before many times. The president of Ecuador was a leftist. He was very much aware of the climate crisis, and was trying to save the Ecuadorian rainforest region where they had discovered oil. He had been working with a group, Norwegian, I think it was a pension fund or something. They've been helping out with all kinds of, restoration projects. But then oil was discovered. And he said, well, look, I can't just forego these, future oil earnings. I mean, Ecuador's a poor country. We have enormous poverty. So somebody, but if somebody can give us the income that we would get from all this oil, then we will not drill in the Amazon, part of the Amazon rainforest. And nobody took him up on that. In fact, the fund he was working with said, well, sorry, we can't do that. I mean, it probably was more than they could possibly provide, but that's the point here, that you for a politician, particularly for most of the world's are not rich countries, they can't just forego immediate improvement in their nation's fortunes for the sake of a world solution to the climate crisis, and they shouldn't have to. It's not fair, So it's not just a matter of willingness or their ideological viewpoint. They can be very much on the right side, but they are constrained by reality, the political and economic reality. And as an aside here, Norway, of course, went on to exploit their newly discovered North Sea oil with green technologies, but it's they may not be emitting much in terms of exploiting, but the oil is still going to be sold and burnt in other parts of the world. And here's the sort of the data core of this paper, is that I kind of actually drilled down and took a look at what if you actually look at data on the fossil fuel, in this case it's oil and related products, exports, shares, and look at all the countries that have a significant share of this as their exports and foreign earnings, and you keep in mind that foreign exchange is critical for developing countries. This is the money you can use to buy stuff that you need to develop your country. It turns out that 20%. This is in one estimate. It's about 20% of these countries that comprise about. I'm sorry, the percentages are here. Fuel exports, 26.3% of small states, 6.1% of sub-Saharan Africa, 8 point so forth. As a percent of GDP. So this is not even just of fuel exports for these countries, but these are groups of selective countries, and the countries are here. These are World Bank categories of countries, but perhaps a more indicative, straightforward example is just look at all the countries with over 10% of their export earnings in fossil fuel, in oil, and it's just oil and derivatives. We're not taking into account coal or natural gas or anything else. And you get, it's about 4 trillion in foreign exchange is going to these countries, and they represent about 1.1 billion. It's 14.2% of the human population in 2019, when this data is from.
Ron,
so
if I just could, it's 27 after the hour.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much more you have, but I want to make sure.
Okay, I'll thank you, Herb. Yeah, so this is, this is just, $4 trillion. So somehow we need to come up with a massive way to provide an alternative to these, these, many of these, the oil companies are national companies. I mean, we like to focus on the majors, but many of them are, and they're quite, they can be corrupt and so forth and so on, but they are actually, quite essential to the existing economies of many countries in the world. So we have to deal with this. We have to provide some way of addressing this. And just to cut to the chase here, this is the HPAC program. Of course, we need to cool the planet, reduce emissions, and remove emissions. But one of the ways to do this, here's another important data point. Whoops, is it in this? It should be in this paper. Well, it's in the paper anyway. I don't know if I got it in the slide, but the the Kyoto Accord had an agreement called the Clean Clean Development Mechanism. Under the Clean Development Mechanism, the Kyoto Accord was a cap and trade, a global cap and trade system that under which rich countries could offer to, could offset their emissions by sending money to poor countries that would, effectively cause the same, have the same effect, at least in theory. Now, there's a lot of criticism of the contracts, and some of them probably were not legitimate for various reasons, but they had set up an agency in Geneva to monitor this and try and get a handle on this. But in any case, it was over 300 billion was transferred over the years of, and this is UN data, when the CDM was operative under the Kyoto Accord. And a lot of that actually turned out was sent to China and used for, it turns out, wind development and also solar voltaic cell development. And a lot of it was, not cutting down forests and things like that are more controversial. But 300 billion is what was transferred, literally, cash transferred, money transferred from rich countries to poor countries under and that was terminated by the global community around 2012 and replaced with this Green Climate Fund. And the Green Climate Fund is a purely voluntary exercise where countries, pledge to, wealthy countries pledge money to help with sustainable development in poorer countries. That fund has raised a grand total of, I can't remember the date, but it's something like maybe 18 billion. I mean, it's orders of magnitude less. And of course, the reason is, where is it here? Anyway, the data is in there somewhere. I'm sorry. Here we go, 16.8 billion. So it's 303.8 billion versus 16.8 billion for the Green Climate Fund. So this is, so one of the things I'm suggesting in the paper is that unless we have something like the Kyoto Accord, some kind of regime that the Kyoto Accord, by the way, was extended in Europe, continued by the EU, and they were the only major region in the world that actually saw significant reductions in emissions since I think it was from the 1990. So they surpassed the original target from 1990, and admittedly, a lot of their manufacture's been offshored to China and other places, just like the U.S. But even compared with the U.S., which has grown faster, and take all those things into account, they still have done significantly better. And so the conclusion that I draw from this is that, and it's not, I mean, I'm getting a lot of this from Graciela Cicholniski, who was one of the primary designer, actually, of the Kyoto Accord, a economist originally from Argentina, but she's at Columbia, works with Peter Eisenberger. But anyway, the conclusion is that, how are we actually really going to do this without some method, a mandatory method, a mandatory regime of some sort that will cause this transfer, at least of funding? Because I've heard, developing country people say, they say, well, we don't need, we can develop technology that's more appropriate for our conditions, which may be true, and that would be great. But there's still the issue of just the resources, the funding, and that's got to happen in order to have a speedy transition. Now, it may be possible through market forces. We'll get there eventually, but it sure seems like, we need more than that. We need a serious, like a catalyst to make this happen fast. If we want to have it happen within a few decades, we need a little bit more than just market forces, because countries are poor, and it just. So that's one of the other conclusions of this paper, and that's where I'll stop.
Hey man, thank you so much, Ron.
Yeah.
Hey, sorry if I rushed you a little bit, but I'm sure we've got lots of comments, questions. The first thing that strikes me is there were so many provocative points you made. It could be like a whole year's graduate seminar in 40 minutes or so, and. It reminds me how much I miss being back in graduate school, at least the intellectual part, not the rest of it. But that being said, just a quick comment or two, and I'll ask a question and we'll go around. When you mentioned the Ecuador, situation. Many of you, or some of you, may be aware or not, because this is very recent, that a comparable situation is emerging in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where 5 years ago amazingly they discovered, nobody on earth knew it apparently, a peat field that was the size of England's, and now they've discovered oil there. And it has, and the reason I know it, I was just writing up an entry in my book about this, that it has like 30 billion, estimate 30 billion tons of carbon there. And peat is so fragile. So it's a world catastrophe. And the US is in some sort of talks with the Congo, and other countries are, to try to find out, I think this is going to be a real case study test of whether the world can get its act together at a time when you have, inflation and war and all the rest of that. If you might want to comment on just that, and in the context of, even since we started HPAC over a year ago, these two horrible forces have emerged in the world, maybe neither one all that surprising, which is worldwide inflation, number one, which makes it much more difficult to find the excess resources. And number two, you've got, Russia, out there on its own, ostracized by half the world and all the rest of it. And yet they have to cooperate on, any kind of strategy such as the ones we're talking about. So anyway, let me stop there. If you want to comment on anything I just said or asked, go for it.
Yeah, thank you, Herb. Yeah, I did see some press reports on that, but thank you for raising that. It's another example of what we're facing, and I think all of and the battle with the what's going on. I mean, we are facing a major political struggle. I think between for once, the U.S. is on the good side, really fighting for democracy, which is great. As a leftist, we're back sort of in World War II scenario. But this is an epic political struggle, and in the midst of that, we have to address this climate crisis that's kind of barreling down, to very, very fast. And again, so I think what this all points to is the need for exactly our strategy, that look, we have to have this transition to a different kind of industrial civilization for sure. And we have to draw down the greenhouse gas. We have to restore nature, because we're destroying nature at an alarming rate as well. Which is the basis for our existence, obviously. But it's going to take time, and the only way to sort of keep things, or try to keep things under control while we're working on all these problems, is a tourniquet. Maybe I've heard David Keith say that. Well, I don't like to talk about in his case SAI as a means to provide us more time, because I think it's, that leads to people saying, well, that's why it's a moral hazard, that you're sort of supporting the moral hazard position when you say that. And so maybe, just say as a means to limit extreme catastrophe right now, as just a risk management strategy. If, this is just kind of basic stuff, So, I mean, I know Mike has been on this for a long time, that, this is one of the problems with the conventional strategy. So I think, all these things really are arguments for direct climate cooling, right? The urgency of that and the need for that, now as soon as possible, as soon as reasonably possible, because we really can't, it's so hard to move societies and world systems, and it doesn't happen overnight. And there's political reality and economic reality to deal with. That exactly the things you're talking about.
Okay. By the way, in finishing up the book now, I came up with a term. I was using tourniquet or Band-Aid, and as of yesterday, I came up with Arctic ice pack. So, I don't know what folks think about that. You can put your thumbs up or down or whatever if you like. But anyway, let me turn it over to Brian.
Thank you. And I think some great points, starting with the Congo. Not only is this a risk from a fossil fuel extraction standpoint, but it turns out that region of the Congo is prime for palm oil plantations. So, we've got to kind of watch it from that standpoint, because we can lose the peat just as easily from overzealous agriculture and ever more palm oil, as we've seen in Indonesia and other places. The other point I wanted to make briefly is that I think the units are wrong on some of these sensitivity measures. In a world where you don't have tipping points, there could be a case to be made for, oh yeah, get to zero emissions and maybe it'll stop heating up. But with tipping points, it's really a different situation. What we're really doing when we get to zero emissions is that we, stop turning up the burner on the stove, right? The stove's still on, right? And that is the watts per square meter, because we got a higher level of greenhouse gases. And I just looked over, the alternate world is actually, a Venusian climate, which is around 800 degrees Fahrenheit and 90 atmospheres of carbon dioxide. And that's tipping points unleashed, is a planet where lead and other metals melt, and it's just not, it's utterly not livable. And so to that end, I'm reminded of, as we stop turning up the burner and actually get to zero, then the melting rate will level off. So we'll only be melting a certain amount of million cubic kilometers of ice per year. And but when that last sea ice cube melts, I keep thinking of the metaphor of the glass of ice water. And the glass of ice water doesn't change temperature until the last ice cube melts. When the last ice cube melts, it goes up like a skyrocket because it's sitting on a burner, and we haven't turned the burner off till we get back down to a pre-industrial greenhouse gas level. So those are just my observations, and I'd suggest we redo a sensitivity curve that says number of millions of cubic kilometers of ice lost per degree K per year, right? Because it's going to just change the rate of melting as opposed to the actual melting itself. Anyway, back to you guys.
Yeah. Yeah, all good points, Brian. In fact, I know that you and others, Mike and so forth, have emphasized that a lot of what's happening now is not anthropogenic. They're emissions that are the methane and whatnot that is really a feedback effect of the positive of what we've already done. Causing nature to turn from sources from sinks to sources of in various places.
Yeah, and along those lines, instead of a carbon dividend, which is what we all hope for in Washington, we're getting a methane dividend. It's paying dividends right now. So that's a little daunting. Maybe we should use that in our framing.
Yeah. So very good points, and that's why I think we've been trying to make the point that we actually need negative anthropogenic emissions to offset the positive natural emissions that we've been stimulating through our activities and these feedback loops. So yeah, it's just all the more reason why we need a way to get this under, to try to stop the damage or at least reduce the damage as much as we can until we can address these very serious potential tipping points and other problems. So that I'm speaking to the converted, I know.
Who else? I'm sure there are other questions, comments. Mike, was that your hand?
Yeah, I wanted actually to go back to the start of your presentation and ask a question that has bothered me, and that is that when they talk about the change in the size of the economy, they don't differentiate between what are good and bad effects. So Hurricane Ian caused tremendous damage, but it's going to be a great economic amplifier of what is going on in Florida. There's going to be all kinds of money pulled from insurance entities there and everywhere and amplifying it. I'm not sure that's a way to increase the kind of increase in the economy that they want and jobs and building. And that's true elsewhere. I mean, dumping oil by the side of the road leads to money gets spent for cleanup, and it's counted as a positive in the economy. So is the economic profession really unable to try and differentiate something that's sort of beneficial for welfare from what isn't beneficial for welfare? I mean, we want to build positive things, not keep getting more activity. And when the DICE model was used and said that the 10°C warming would lead to whatever it was, a 20% reduction in the global economy, you go, yeah, but you're spending, every bit of it presumably on trying to survive. So that isn't really, that was a very strange thing in the Nordhaus model, the way it was done, to use that as a metric. So I guess I appreciate your comments on that.
Yeah, Mike, no, it's a very good point. And what you're referring to is that in the GDP, the standard measure of economic output, there is no distinction made in terms of when you spend money in the economy and you create jobs and you produce things, whether that's to offset a disaster or you're doing a cleanup, or whether you're actually improving economic conditions for humans and the general welfare. And of course, economists focus on humans, but we would include the other species and natural systems as well. And these are all things that are well-known problems with the conventional measures of economic output. In fact, the data that from the IPCC report of the 25% reduction in world GDP by the year 2100 with a 2.6 Celsius warming, a lot more credible than Nordhaus's DICE models. I should as I emphasized in the report in the paper, but or the foot anyway. That 20, it's still using GDP as a measure. So when you think of the problem, of course, is that we're using resources, and the more we use resources to try and address disasters and help people get back on their feet, the less resources, actual real economic resources, there is available to work on our problems, to lift people up and improve life and redistribute, deal with our increasingly terrible equity and economic power allocation problem. So yeah, it's an excellent point. So so if anything, even the IPCC model, it's 25% reduction in GDP. That would presumably include, because they're just running econometric kind of statistical projections, presumably includes GDP, so-called GDP, that's actually just cleanup and rebuilding houses, trying to restore conditions, restore the electrical grid in Puerto Rico and so forth. That is really, from any practical point of view, it's a waste. You're just kind of rebuilding and redoing stuff that you already built, and it should not be counted as actual additions to output.
I thought the World Bank some years ago had a 4-component way of calculating things about what was useful money and what wasn't, or something. But
yeah, there have been many methods. Stiglitz has been involved. There are all kinds of different kinds of ways to measure. The UN, the world, various international organizations have put together different metrics, and they do provide a very different view, especially if you include things like distribution, inequality, and impact on the environment and what that does to human welfare. I think the problem, the issue is a lot of those metrics depends on judgments. Just kind of like it's very hard to nail those down with from a data. It's some kind of uncontroversial way that people won't quibble over, in terms of how much weight are you giving to this or that or the other. And so in terms of trying to set up a the GDP, by the way, has all kinds of problems in it. The way it addresses the role of finance, you know, it pretends that finance contributes to the economy, and that was a change that was made, I think, in the 1990s or early 2000s, ironically right before the crash. But you know, so the finance is now contributing supposedly this large percentage of GDP, and many of us would say that that's the finance isn't contributing. You know, a lot of it is just extraction. It's not contributing anything. It's these guys just making money from gambling, and they're not doing anything productive. They're not building, you know, new factories or houses, or, you know, really improving the real economy. So there are a lot of problems in all these measures, but your point is an excellent one. It's a very good point, and it's something we should always be aware of. And someday maybe, you know, we'll have a better measure of benefits to human and natural life, a metric to measure these things.
Okay, just one quick comment, and then I'll turn it over to Robert and then Brew. It seems to me that essentially we're compounding the tragedies that are the climate tragedies that are occurring, the hurricanes and the droughts and all the rest, to the degree to which when we quote unquote governments choose to rebuild or ameliorate, they're basically going back to the old model. They're not, in other words, if the federal government said to Ron DeSantis, you know, we'll give you $5 billion to rebuild Southwest Florida, but not one penny needs to be spent on rebuilding the fossil fuel infrastructure. We want all renewables, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We want, you know, conservation buyouts, so we don't have to do this every 10 years. It said then you would be making true progress and turning a tragedy into an advance. But we're not doing that. I mean, and that's the same thing that happened during the, you know, during the both COVID and the collapse in 2009. You know, the world spent trillions of dollars in bailouts. And basically did it just to perpetuate the incumbent structure because of, you know, politics and all sorts of things. So that's my mini rant. Let me turn it over to Robert.
Look, I think it's excellent what you presented, Ron, just presenting the political economy of climate change, and appreciated your mention of Steve Keen, whose work on the appallingly bad neoclassical economics of climate change was cited by Kyle Kimball in his recent undergraduate thesis, which is actually a very good opening up of the politics here, and this whole question of how the IPCC, and Mike mentioned Nordhaus's DICE model, has similarly just presented a failure to engage with major factors in climate change. So yeah, there's it leads through to, you know, that there's this whole problem of a lack of realism in climate policy. You mentioned Michael Mann and his really weird idea of the best news you've never heard. You know, just the refusal to engage on tipping points and phase shift. So it's about this problem of reversing the order of IPCC priorities. You know, like at the moment, it's one one reduce, two remove, three cool, and we just need to switch that order around. You know, cool needs to be number one, and so you know, the political framing here just seems to be the essential challenge.
And I would add, Robert, you're being generous when you say they add cool as the third leg, because I haven't, you know, they seem to be pretty much silent on that particular leg, but yeah. So yeah, okay, no, I agree absolutely. Yeah, good points. Yeah.
So, well, let me give my 2 penneth worth on this. You've got to get right down to the cause of these things. Fundamentally, human societal structures are not fit for purpose. The laws we function under are not fit for purpose. It's perfectly legal to carry out large acts of environmental destruction, be they chemical pollutants or tearing down rainforests, or you name it, any of those things. And under smaller scale societal situations, if you all live around a lake and you all pollute it and it starts to stink, you get together and you say, you shouldn't do that anymore. And when you do that, you create an economic opportunity, because you create a job for someone to put in a sewage system and clean up the lake. Fundamentally, at the moment, because of that situation, we have fraudulent Earth system accounting. It's fraudulent because we have vast unfunded liabilities, which we're happy to go along with, but actually they're carrying those massive costs down the lane. And we have to address the problem at its core and put that right. So you need to have a legal structure, first of all, which immediately starts to resolve some of these problems. Then you go forward to what is our intent and what are our agreed ambitions. And our agreed ambitions are crystallized in those UN Sustainable Development Goals. 193 countries agreeing to that. What does that mean if you deliver those? It means you go from 2.5 billion people on the planet living well and 5 billion living terribly, to 9 billion or 9.5 billion people all living well. And the implication of that is massive growth in global GDP. Colossal. But you can only achieve that with very large scale land restoration and by using energy sources which are truly renewable or truly free. Energy from the sun, momentum from the planet, etc. You make your hydrocarbons not necessarily legal, but you create a situation where all that has to be cleaned up because there are laws against it. And if you put those laws in place, then you can't finance it. I think the key to this, though, is getting people to understand what the future can be. We are perfectly capable of feeding 9 billion people through our advancing agrotech and the really interesting fermentation techniques that are coming through now. That can free up, we do that on 5% of the land we use now for agriculture. That frees up a vast amount of land for restoration, regrowing biomass. And it requires an enormous investment in those underprivileged parts of the world, which tend to be the parts of the world which have been so badly damaged. And that means that you're going to irrigate large tracts of Africa and other places, and you're going to build those economies as you go. And you've got to get to a point where you recognize the true cost and true value of everything. So you need to recognize the true value of the man who is protecting a rainforest, the people restoring soils, doing all this work, and those of us in the urban areas who are using those resources that are provided by those other people pay properly for them. But the net result is enormous wealth, enormous growth of markets. And if you go to the world's financiers and you point out to them that on their current course, everything is at risk, particularly insurance companies. If you're running an insurance company now and you have a smidgen of the knowledge that we have, you will realize that in 30 years' time, there is no way you're going to be able to pay out on our current course the money that is being paid to you by the young who are embarking on their careers now. It's fraudulent. On the other hand, if you can show them a way of creating an enormous amount of wealth, and fundamentally, wealth comes down to land and resources and the commerce within it, then you will easily be able to do that. And there's a very, very positive future. So everything around the story, if you're targeting a planet with 9 billion people living well, which we seem to be doing, leads to great growth if you follow a sensible path. And if you make the things that prevent that path being possible, illegal. Fairly straightforward.
Yeah, no, those are excellent points, Brew. I think, yeah, I mean, I have nothing to disagree with. In fact, as you know, there's the Envisionation document that you put together is really, the kind of the inspiring and hopeful document that that may get us to that better world. But yeah, I think the that's the problem is, you know, how do we get from here to there? I know that, yeah, you know, I go back to Marx again, who used to, you know, just harangue the utopian socialists with all their blueprints and whatnot, say, no, we need a, you know, we need a method, a political method to get us to that better world. It's not enough just to have a vision.
Well, this is intelligent, caring capitalism.
I'm sorry?
It's intelligent, caring capitalism.
Yeah. I mean, it's right. Yeah, I don't really care. I mean, you could call, you know, the countries in Northern Europe that, you know, have, you know, very large public spending, you know, sometimes over 50% of the GDP for, you know, but, you know, whether they're capitalist or socialist, they certainly have a very large sector that is a competitive capitalist sector within a kind of flexible security. You know, so yeah. So so they get the benefits of both systems.
I'm gonna cut it off only because
that's where
I want to. This is the most fascinating part of the discussion. Not to take away from anything else anyone else said, but we did say we'd stop at the top of the hour. Just two or three real quick comments. Number one, I'm hesitant to say this, but all 6 of us on the steering circle and the white paper committee have signed off on the vision paper, and and working with Suzanne, who's putting the last pieces together. I won't say exactly when you'll see it, but you should see it quite soon. That's number one. Number two, just a comment, a quick reaction to what you said, Brew, about 9 billion people. Unfortunately, my colleague Philip, it looks like, just left, but I'm on a study group with him locally, and it's called an ecosystems group. And most of the people there are attempting to demonstrate with their statistics and logic that the world has no more of a carrying capacity than 2 billion people. And in fact, one colleague says that we won't have more than 600 million people by the end of the century. So it's just fascinating. And I'm a big fan of.
I'll argue that out with them, and quite honestly, that's not a message anybody's going to succeed in saying.
Right.
Good luck with that.
Well, I don't disagree with you about that, but it's just fascinating, this wide range of analyses of the future made by very bright, sophisticated people that are completely all over the place. Maybe that's a good thing. Anyway, thanks everybody. It's a really great conversation. Lots to think about, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Yep.
Great. Good to
Thank
see
you.
everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.